This should be information that underlines what we need to do to move this country forward. Well, hi, everybody. It's David Leis here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. It's hard to believe, but fall is turning to another season shortly as we mark the occasion of Thursday, November the 20th, 2026, the year of our Lord. But a warm welcome to everybody to this Leaders on the Frontier, where we talk about important issues that matter to Canadians. And we talk about it from a unique perspective, namely the public policy. The public policy that's involved in the choices that impact you. It's been said to govern is to make choices, and so it is with us as we think about our nation. And we realized that this past Monday was when the federal budget was passed. So we're going to continue to, I hate to use these morbid words, but dissect the budget. And what does this really mean in terms of the facts, the information that will enable us to prosper as a nation? We all know that Canada is an incredible nation. We all believe in it. So we know we've got to renew it. So how do we do this? And the budget has been talked about as transformational. It's been referred to by the government itself as about investment, about unleashing the private sector. So is that true? How do we bring some factual analysis to that? So we want to serve you, the audience, and we are very grateful. I am just so delighted by all the good afternoon, everyone's from all our participants here, the audience. We're really grateful for you. Prairie and Matthew says hi. So, bring it on, all your comments and questions. We've got an extraordinary panel of two guests here today, and will join us in a moment. And they bring a lot of great wisdom and expertise here that I think they will want to hear, and certainly ask questions, and we welcome your comments. So without further ado, there's a lot of things going on in terms of headlines. So I just wanted to, as usual, as people come on, highlight a few things before we get into the larger budget discussion and where we're going. But one of is a fascinating story about immigration. I don't know if you noticed that, but yesterday, the immigration minister federally permanently ended a requirement that refugees in Canada do not undergo a medical exam when applying for permanent residency. So that will take in effect immediately. And it's an interesting story because that type of examination requires an awful lot of money. I believe it's some $500 million, if memory serves me correctly, and that was in the case of a parliamentary committee. So it's very interesting, how that immigration file is managed or not managed. In another news story, it's interesting that BC is backing a proposal to increase capacity for the existing Trans Mountain pipeline. So what are the politics of that as Premier David Eby and his government walks the line in terms of different groups that frankly don't want any pipelines coming to the coast? And how does that enable us to move forward our economy, given that oil and gas is our number one industry? And the other news I wanted to highlight was highlighted by the Epoch Times, where, of course, Premier Daniel Smith says there's proposed legislation that will allow surgeries outside regular hours while maintaining quotas for public procedures. So that's a very interesting announcement. And of course, supporters say that model could really help reduce wait lists and keep specialists in the province. And of course, there's always detractors that would say, well, we're in this is somehow going to undermine the public healthcare system. So what do you think? Is that true? Another news story that is kind of fascinating is that U.S. Canadian authorities continue to pursue a fascinating character named Ryan Wedding. You may recall that he's an Olympian on the Canadian team, no less. There he is snowboarding. And it's fascinating that he has allegedly got involved with the trafficking of drugs in a big way. And so it's not just him that's being looked at as a fugitive, but there's a number of other arrests that have taken place as he has somehow, believe it or not, allegedly pursued a very senior role in the drug trade with various cartels. So we'll see that story and whether that's true and how that unfolds. There's an awful lot going in our country, and so without further ado, I want to introduce our two guests. They are Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, who's the Vice President of Policy and Research. A warm welcome to you, Marco.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
And Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, and he is a dynamite fellow. He comes from Dalhousie, and he is better known as the food professor. And Sylvain, we really admire you for communicating complex policy subjects, particularly in the area of agriculture, which is one of those ace cards that Canada has. So we're welcome that you could join us for this discussion today, Sylvain. Oh, I think you may be muted.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you loud and clear. Okay,
certainly. Yeah, no, I'm pleasure to be here. I've worked with the Frontier Center for many years now, so always enjoy it.
Well, it's great to see you. And so right off the top, as I was alluding to earlier, the government itself has said that this budget is transformational. It's going to release, it's an investment in building our economy, moving us forward in terms of affordability and private investment. And right off the top, I wanted to highlight a little summation of some of the key points of information regarding the budget, just so we recap that. We've got a $78 billion deficit. That's one of the record amounts. We do have some immigration cuts coming off a record number of immigrants coming into this country. We've got so-called investments in infrastructure to improve the competitiveness of our economy. We have public service cuts, and I believe it's 40,000 over the life of the budget. And the debate there is, are they really cuts or are they just simply attrition? And we've got a budget that continues to focus in on net zero and different energy projects as the government asserts that Canada will help lead the way in terms of energy transition. We do have some modest changes, tax changes, as I recall, in terms of helping to write off business capital investments to improve their competitiveness. We've got additional funding for the CBC, the state broadcaster. We've got a significant increase in military expenditures. And we also have, I'm just trying to see that we've got less growth than predicted in 2024. That's part of the context. So that's part of the objective, overarching objective of the budget, is to really move this economy forward and serve Canadians. So I have a question, and I'll start off with Marco right off the hop. If you had to give this budget a letter grade, how would you grade it, Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie?
I'm a little rusty on giving grades because I haven't been in the academy for many years. But if I had to give it a letter, I think it would be a C minus.
A C minus, and why is that?
Basically, it does not meet a great deal of the expectations, some of the expectations that it had set for itself. On the one hand, I think it would be fair to say that there are a few surprises. So there were a few surprises for me. I expected that they'd be a heck of a lot more rhetoric regarding identity politics, environmental politics, and that sort of thing. And I'm happy that even though they're still addressing some of those things, the rhetoric has cooled down. On the other hand, the rhetoric on building and investing is being heightened, but the investments are really not what they ought to be. I'm thinking of the military, for example, where they say that they have heightened their level of spending, but it's still not enough, and the procurement is a mess, continues to be a mess. In things like infrastructure, I'm great to see that they want to spend more on infrastructure, but the rules around infrastructure and the timelines and all that stuff is still undefined and very much loose. So some good things in there, but not great definition, and the expectations still fall short.
All right. Well said, Marco. So turning to you, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, what would be your letter grade?
Yes, I appreciate Marco's assessment with a C minus. I guess when he was in school, Marco only got A's, so he wasn't familiar with other letters. So I understand that for sure. But for the others, I would say, I mean, I would give it an I as an incomplete, really.
Oh,
The reason is that, well, first of all, I only look at ag policies and agriculture and food. So I do believe that the budget was incredibly boring. And frankly, I think it was long overdue. We needed a boring, gimmick-free, a slogan-free budget, and that's what we got. I was actually satisfied just because of that. I was getting tired of, GST holidays and this and that, and
mhm.
which meant nothing, only to get in government more into the economy, which really was detrimental to farmers, to processors, and everyone else. Investments in infrastructure to me was a relief. $118 billion. To me, it was good news. Finally, some sort of commitment towards infrastructure, and we dearly need it. But for everything else, I was still hungry. I was still looking for a vision for the sector, in particular the agri-food sector, which is really something we dearly need right now.
Okay. Well, Sylvain, I would give you a letter grade of A for creativity. You gave it a letter grade of incomplete. So that's kind of cool. But to your point, though, you're saying that the budget, ironically, was kind of boring. So the whole
I thought it was,
word,
yeah.
yeah. So but the word that the government was pushing, one of them among many, was bold. You didn't see any boldness in this. Is that what you're getting at?
I don't believe it's bold. No, it was. I think it was a work in progress, if you will. I mean, we need more. Now, pushing aside the deficit and the debt, which is incredibly troubling, to be honest,
Mhm,
I'm still looking for true investments that actually will make a difference.
mhm,
And frankly, if you look at the history, and I certainly would want to hear Marco on this, but it seems as though the mega projects, the nation building projects are leftovers from past governments that never uh, pushed through some of these projects. I may be wrong here, but I have heard Ottawa spending money on natural gas capacity, ports, and things like that, but it never happened. And right now we have a government just rehashing some of the projects that we've heard in the past, but that never happened.
mhm.
So there's no fresh new ideas that came out of the budget, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think you're right. Just a note from the audience before we turn to Marco on that question about projects. One of them is from Robert, who says, adding 312 billion in debt to a 3 trillion total Canadian debt is not investment and helps no one except, well, in this case, the assertion is liberal corruption or corruption of the government. So, there's some cynicism here. It's also interesting that a previous comment was from Kelly, who says government, it's just up there a little bit. Government does not invest, they spend, full stop. This is a total joke. So we'll see what the larger public's take is on this. I've seen the beginnings of some polls and public reaction, but it's pretty mixed. So, Marco, how about that question from Sylvain about are we regurgitating a lot of the national projects that have been on the books and frankly announced long time ago?
A lot of it is that, yeah. In fact, most of it.
Mhm,
What is newest in this budget really is either an attempt at resetting the way we account for certain things. So we have moved an enormous amount of spending onto this new category that we call investment. And this is a problematic category because a great deal of what the government calls investment is probably not. Uh,
mhm,
and the second thing is that they have revved up these investments and move them to a category where will allow them to now say that the rest of it is operating budget,
mhm,
and so they're also changing the rhetoric and saying that they are aiming at balancing their operating budget,
mhm.
which is almost kind of nonsense too, because they're still spending more on operations than before. But there's still a chance in which by 2030 something they might be able to balance the operating budget if they put a little bit more restraint, but they could still be ballooning all of it, the rest of it, in terms of investment. So it's almost like saying, we're going to spend a little less on hamburger meat and buns, but we're going to rev up the spending on champagne and caviar.
All right. How's that for a food metaphor?
But the champagne and caviar don't count as operating, of course, because that's
That's right.
it's
On
it's celebration.
yachts and planes for sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
But I mean, I'll take something back. I mean, there was nothing creative or new in this budget. Actually, there was some creative accounting. To Marco's point, I mean, you're basically opening up the door, separating operational versus long-term capital investments. You're basically opening up the door to more abuse and more spending without any accountability. And certainly that's a concern for everyone. And it really, and again, going back to agriculture, and this is the reason why the carbon tax was so troubling, is that you're basically generating revenue for the government, and that money is going into a black box, and they can do anything with it.
You're right.
And so there's no accountability and no purpose. And so this new accounting that we got from Ottawa, to me, is very concerning, because again, it could actually give Ottawa an opportunity to hide the lack of accountability towards taxpayers.
Okay, so let's just clarify that, because I think you've made, both of you, very good points there around sleights of hand when it comes to accounting here. And this should concern every Canadian. So let's just go through them. And I want to go first with the whole idea that they're really spending even more money. I mean, just to put this into perspective, this is another record budget deficit of some $78 billion. I just marvel, some 10 years ago, people were marveling at the first Trudeau governments as having major deficits. This is even higher, just a little bit lower than the record COVID-19 budget. So that is really quite significant. And what they're doing is they're classifying many items, instead of capital, but as they're classifying things that are arguably operating or spending as capital. And I think Jason Jacques, the interim parliamentary budget officer, whose job is really to bring some measure of nonpartisan insight and analysis on this, has cited this and said there's a $94 billion difference in how the government itself is describing this versus how they would describe it in terms of their accounting practices. I think this is a huge red flag.
It's pure creative accounting, which is so Canadian.
Exactly.
It's so Canadian, or maybe so liberal. Who knows?
Well, it's creative accounting. So that is a huge flag. And then I think the other side to this that you've mentioned is, I think what Jason Jacques underlined is he can't see any plan to balance here. The fiscal guardrails are gone in terms of really taking that seriously. And I know the budget document, as I looked at, articulates that intention, but the issue is the numbers. They don't really add up, given this sleight of hand in describing a lot of operating costs as capital ones. Is that a fair comment, Marco?
Yeah, I mean, there were very few guardrails to begin with before. The government spent whatever it wanted, whenever it wanted, and they made promises that they could never keep. Let's remember that Chrystia Freeland was scandalized because the $45 billion deficit was going to be 60. Right, and she basically almost single-handedly brought the government down, her own government, the Trudeau premiership, because of that fib. And now we have blown the 60 billion into nearly 80 billion almost. And so this is the leader that this party touted as an economic genius, and that he was going to be kind of the economic messiah for the country. I don't see it. In fact, it looks worse.
All right. So before we go further into the even bigger issues, I think that this budget represents in terms of the big takeaways, I did want to talk a little bit about the political science, namely that this budget passed on Monday by a razor-thin margin. If we look at the numbers specifically, we had, it was very tight here, and the numbers here shown prove it. I mean, you've got basically a situation where it's passed by 170 votes to 168. Help us understand what happened there. And I want to show one clip here with Elizabeth May, because she's the leader of the Green Party, and she played a very important role here. And she really emphasized her desire to vote for the budget if the government could promise that they were on board with the climate change agenda vis-a-vis the Paris Accord. So I want to share this clip with you.
Agree that it is a deficiency in the budget that our legally binding Paris commitments are not mentioned. Can he confirm here on the floor of this House that in passing this budget, the government is committed to holding to as far below 2 degrees as possible, to funding climate adaptation, to delivering on the nature strategy, and continuing to engage in meaningful Indigenous reconciliation?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the honourable member for advocacy of the Youth Climate Corps, which is in this budget and which this House can vote for. Vote for the future of this country. Mr. Speaker, this budget puts us on the path for real results for climate, for nature, for reconciliation. I can confirm to this House that we will respect our Paris commitments for climate change, and we're determined to achieve them. I can confirm with this House that, consistent with our Kunming Montreal commitments, the nature strategy will be released in the coming weeks. We will build this country strong, sustainable, and pure for future generations.
So there you go. Elizabeth May saying, hey, this is what I need the government to say and commit itself to. And there's the Prime Minister responding and say, you got it, what you want here. So what the heck happened? Was this a breakthrough, or is this a fantasy discussion where this is kind of bizarre if you even believe in the Paris climate accords? What happened here? How did this budget get passed by such a tiny margin? Marco, do you want to go first, and then Sylvain?
Sure. We should not be surprised that this is all theater. The reality is there isn't much in terms of climate religion in this budget in the way that there would have been in the previous Trudeau budgets. And so Ms. May, who does not want an election, compared to perhaps other parliamentarians who might want one, could see that there isn't much in terms of her agenda on this budget. There is not much written that she would like in terms of this budget. And so she has to grandstand in front of everyone at the House and pretend that the Prime Minister's word on this counts. I mean, we have seen the Prime Minister's word isn't worth much in terms of so many different things that he has said, that he said or done during the trade negotiations, which has been completely denied at the other end or by different other partners. So her expression later on said that, she had never known the Prime Minister to fib, or she had never known anyone to call the Prime Minister a liar. Is all theater. There's nothing less and nothing more than just pure theater from Elizabeth May.
All right. Interesting, Marco. So theater is a key word there. What about you, Sylvain?
Well, Miss May got up in the chamber asking Prime Minister Carney to promise things that he've already promised. So there was just nothing new. I agree with Marco. It's just pure theater. But I'm going to say something that probably most of your audience would not want to hear, but I actually am pretty convinced based on this week that this Carney government will survive 4 years, will survive its term, because you have a minority government with many options. Carney has many options. I hate to say this, but I suspect that this is going to be a recurring scenario over the next several years where, I mean, he just needs a couple of votes, and and the opposition can offer him many different alternatives. And so I do think that right now we're seeing a parliament that doesn't want to go to the polls. Maybe Canadians want to go to the polls, but I didn't see a parliament wanting to go to the polls this week. And I don't know what kind of shenanigans went on behind the scenes, because I was not purview to that. But what I saw was irrational commentaries that made little or no sense. If you really want to make the government accountable, we should already be in election right now. But it didn't happen.
Okay, so I'm hearing again the word theater without using the word theater, but I'm also hearing.
Well, if you want
that,
another word, I can actually give it to you, but you may want to shut down YouTube.
Okay. So, but,
I was gonna say circus, but decided.
Okay. But the point, though, that you're making is that it seemed like there is a parliament there that did not want to hold the government's feet to the fire fully and have another election, namely this Christmas election idea that was concerning people. Like, this is kind of high drama because there's a lot of parties there that did not want an election. So
I would start with the Conservatives, by the way.
You would start with the Conservatives.
I mean, I've had the pleasure to work with all parties in Ottawa.
Yes.
And what I saw from the Conservative made little or no sense. It just didn't make any sense to me. They would have been able to gather the votes to defeat the government. I think we all know this, okay? It didn't happen. Why?
Wow. Okay,
Why?
So very interesting. So what do you think, audience? Are these gentlemen correct in their analysis? And, to the point of Sylvain is making, was kind of everybody in that parliament pretty focused on making sure there would not be a Christmas election? Well, it's a very interesting thought. So as we turn now to, again, the significance of this budget, I wanted to just highlight some of the big takeaways from my perspective. There's so many of them. But one of them is I see that you have a significant bet going on here. And that is that this government believes that it can kind of move forward this country. We all know that the last 10 years, we've seen a very stagnant economy at some 1% the last 10 years. And if you factor in inflation, all kinds of other economic factors, Canada is a stagnating country. I mean, this is just the facts. So there's that famous slide summation of showing GDP, gross
Isn't
domestic
that our
product.
slide?
That is.
Didn't we make that graph?
I think I got that from the IMF.
The IMF. Listen, David, I actually need to go, unfortunately, because I have a 3:30 meeting right now. But I do want to thank you for your invitation, to be honest. And carry on, gentlemen. I think you're in good hands with Marco, to be honest.
Okay. Well, we've got
Good to see
Sylvain.
you.
I'm so glad you could join us for this conversation, and thank you very much for joining us, my friend.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So if we look at the situation, we've got a low growth economy. And it seems to me that one of the big takeaways is the government is betting that they can play a central role as a government to get the private sector to invest in Canada. I mean, that's the story here, is that overall the net outflow of capital is stunning, and we've got to get Canada to be an attractive place to invest and get on with it. So is this going to really, are the results going to show from this, Marco? Like, it's kind of like a philosophy of centralizing economic power. You've got a national project office. You've got this large amount of money being pumped into the system, all with the idea that government can really start up this economy. Is that a fair comment, Marco?
Yes, I think so. I think one of the things that that motivated me to give this budget a kind of a passing grade is that there are recognitions that didn't exist before in the previous budgets and the previous governments. For example, there is a recognition in this budget that productivity is a problem in this country.
Right.
And you can see it. There is a recognition that infrastructure matters. There is a recognition that resource extraction matters. There is a recognition that things like trade corridors and trade and all these things that were not even glossed over, they were completely ignored in previous years by almost the very same group of people who are in the government today. And so I think we have to recognize that. What is not what has not changed is the fact that they believe that the government has the primary role and responsibility of running the economy, and they believe that this is their mission, if you will. So, for example, most of the changes that have been made in recognizing that what is needed for housing is not more subsidies, but that there's a need to increase the volume and supply of housing. And so that they're going to go and borrow a ton of money to supply more housing to the market. So there is an attempt there at increasing the supply. That's sound economics. What is not is that they're borrowing all this money to do it, and they're giving themselves the power to do it. At the same time, though, and this is the bad part, at the same time, they have kept in place all the regulation or most of the regulation that impedes the growth of construction and increase the growth of supply in housing. And so you can say that you're investing all this money into the increasing of housing supply, but in reality, all the market friction or most of the market friction that has existed that is essentially responsible for the lack of growth in the housing market is still there. And there are examples of that in housing. There are examples of that in things like defense. There are examples of that in just about every corner of the economy, including, of course, also energy. I am happy to see that the sanctimony seems to be gone about energy extraction, that they want to support pipelines and things like that to some extent. But the defining details are missing. How long is this going to take? Who is going to invest where and in what? Like all those things beyond the pronouncements remain to be seen. And so it's more of the same with slight changes.
Okay, so more of the same from the previous Trudeau government and with slight changes. So are you a bit optimistic that this bet of big spending and centralization of government will actually enable the economy to flourish and serve Canadians?
Not a lot. I don't. We haven't seen, for example, the bond raters rush to give the government an applause or an A on this. A great deal of what is happening here is that the government is committing a great deal of borrowed money into some projects, but there is a gap. They are hoping that the private sector is going to rush in and fill that gap. But that's hope, and hope is not a plan. That hope, by the way, may not materialize. And one of the reasons why it may not materialize is because a lot of the regulation that has kept either foreign investment and national investment from entering the market or has incentivized it to flee the country, those regulations are still there. So if I had to use an analogy, I would say that this budget reminds me of a windmill. You can see the windmill moving, right? So the air is going through and the blades are moving. But the thing is still anchored in the same spot.
Okay. So very interesting analogies here. And there's been fascinating comments from the audience. One is from Sheridan Ford's, bondholders will drop the Canadian dollar eventually. So that's a prediction there. And I think there was an earlier question about property rights. And I did want to pick that up briefly. So the question here again from Sheridan is, no property rights in Canada, high taxes and fees. Why would you risk money in Canada? Please tell. So this is, how do you be clear-eyed and say, how is this budget really advancing the attractiveness of Canada as a place to invest and do business? We know that a lot of our jurisdictions in Canada are really difficult to do business in. I mean, that's one of the obvious stories. And this comes out in many ways with the fact that net, we are losing money. It's flowing out of the country. So And the property rights thing is very interesting because there was quite a episode of Leaders on the Frontier that was released this week, and we've been talking about this now for many weeks on Leaders, is about the whole concern about the recent Cowichan decision in Richmond, BC. And that decision really asserts, and I've had the pleasure of reading the decision. I encourage others to look at it. And basically, it asserts that where there are claims regarding Aboriginal land title, that that is prior and supersedes property rights simple. So this has sent shockwaves through British Columbia and frankly across the country as people in that area are not able to renew mortgages because these are under legal dispute. I mean, this is being appealed by the BC government, a variety of actors, including the city of Richmond and other competing First Nations who have other competing claims. But the point is, all these things are, yet again, another factor in kind of sending a signal that Canada is a place of uncertainty, right? And we know that we have relatively high taxes. We know that we've got a lot of regulation that makes it difficult to do projects. And now we've got the uncertainty about property rights. So Marco, I mean, that's kind of a perfect storm that really kind of tilts, to use your windmill language, against this budget, isn't it?
It may actually be worse than we think in the immediate, not just in the mid long term. I was thinking about this because I was thinking about the impact on housing, for example, right? And this is of course incredibly important because we have a housing crisis in this country. There's no ifs and whens and buts about it. And that a great deal of the housing crisis in this country is actually government induced, again, because of the regulations and the rules and all the environmental hang-ups and all that stuff. And I went and looked a couple of days ago at what the Argentinians are doing. So there is, as you know, a kind of a new-ish government in Argentina. They've been around for 16 months or so, 18 months. And they have essentially already resolved their housing crisis in a year and a half. And the way they did that was they completely removed all the legislation and the regulation that impeded the development of housing and that imposed regulation on the price that one could rent. And within a year and a half, essentially the supply of housing went up by about 40%, and the prices of rentals went down by 2/3. We don't see that in Canada happening, and there is a reason why we don't see that in Canada happening, of course, because of all the regulations. So on top of that, put now all this uncertainty that essentially tells investors and people who want to build houses for themselves that their land on which they plan to build or purchase could tomorrow, by fiat, by the stroke of a pen of someone wearing a black or a red robe, depending on what level of the court we're talking about, their claim and their lawful ownership of that piece of land would disappear. Indeed. So who is gonna want to build under those conditions? Not individuals, and certainly not investors. So that leaves 1/3 option, and is frightening. It means essentially that most of the housing development that we are going to see under these conditions is going to have to come from government. It's going to be co-op housing. It's going to be Soviet-style housing. It's not going to be any kind of housing that Canadians want to live in and that the market is looking for. This is a grim, grim possibility.
Okay, gosh, talk about reality therapy today. As we obviously want Canada to succeed, but these are really tough issues. Now, obviously at Frontier and so many others in the audience believe there are solutions, but we'll talk about those in a moment. Some interesting comments from Kelly. I used to be a proud Canadian. I would leave now, but facial recognition is there, and I do not have the ability to sell my home in BC. Well, that's very interesting. How do you feel about that? I mean, as there's a kind of a cloud of uncertainty in different areas. So we've got to do the best we can. We know this country's worth it. So let's look at some larger questions here in the budget. I guess one of them that I'm fascinated about is that a fascinating thing that was revealed, I think this, what was it, about 3 weeks ago, was the government's change in the debt levels that were allowed by the government. I think it, if memory serves me correctly, from $1.8 trillion to a debt threshold of $2.5 trillion. So what does that mean, Marco? If we look at this, does this mean that the government believes in what's called modern monetary theory, the whole notion from that, trying to recall the French economist that came up with that one, that money essentially grows on trees? It seems like our governments are not being constrained by deficits or concerns about debt. And it concerns me because I think if we think about the possibility of getting a credit downgrade, like we've got to borrow this money. I've been taught that there's no free rides. Ultimately, somebody has to pay for it, whether it's current taxpayers, like we're already paying, what is it? Almost $56 billion in interest rates for the federal government alone, not including other sub-sovereign debt like the provinces and municipalities. Are we headed for a brick wall sooner or later here?
It looks more like an abyss to me.
Okay.
Than a brick wall, because at least a brick wall kind of holds you, to the general perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we might be just sort of flying off this cliff. Essentially, the last couple of budgets try to sort of tether things to some kind of anchor,
Mm-hmm.
putting it within some ratio or some definition of a ratio of debt to GDP.
Mm-hmm.
And that guardrail, as we called it earlier, or that tethering, is now gone. There is no desire to tether the government spending and the growth of deficits and the ballooning of debt to any kind of limitations. So that brings to mind the question, what kind of economics are they practicing? Well, it's not any kind of economics that I would have studied when I went through university.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever this new kind of economics may be, is one that is completely disconnected, almost completely disconnected with what, most of us who have common sense would call reality. And there is a real danger there. I am not given to conspiracies, but when you look at that graph that we showed earlier from the OECD,
Mm-hmm.
It really shows that there is an attempt at keeping Canada where it is. But in economic terms, when you're not advancing, you are regressing, you are
Mm-hmm.
heading backwards.
That's right.
And so this country is, from that perspective, impoverishing itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And when people are impoverished, they become dependent
I agree. Yes.
on the budget of the state, on whatever crumbs a government and its agencies would throw at us. This is concerning.
Okay. I think your audio is a little bit off there, Marco, for some reason. I'm not sure if we can hear your audio fully, but I know, Marco, you've made some very incisive points around the concern that as we spend too much money, people become poor, because obviously that spending is inflationary and also kind of lowers people's standard of living as their dollar goes not as far. I've got some other comments here. From Robert, who says, we are on the same order of financial calamity as France, the UK, and Germany. We're headed to the ditch with a debt to GDP ratio of over 100%. If memory serves, Canada right now is at 114%. So we've really got to get our act in gear here as we look at how we get Canada back on track. Sheridan says it's a clear majority of Canadians don't care about inflation. Well, is that true? What do you agree with Sheridan? As we look at this. But I think to your point, Marco, As Canadians suffer under these circumstances, like if you've got precarity, like you're in a precarious situation where you're just trying to make things meet in terms of paycheck to paycheck, you've got high inflation. It seems to me that you've got that is a formula to keep undermining the strength of the middle class, let alone the entrepreneurial class. And so what does that do to our democracy? Because these budgets are not just simply economic documents, they really strike to the heart of how we're going to serve Canadians and enable them to prosper. And if you have a prosperous citizenry, surely that enables them to participate in our democracy. Are you concerned about that?
Very much. Look, the core of our democracies, both the American, in the Anglosphere especially, perhaps not so much the French, but the core of modern democracies is property. John Locke, who is kind of the one of the fathers, intellectual fathers of the American Constitution, is very clear that the principal aim of government is the protection of property, he says. And we forget that the sort of flowery language of the American Constitution that says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that text is from John Locke, and it says life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. And so the fact that we are undermining property is a concern. But the reason why property is crucial is because one who owns property is capable of having some level of economic independence.
Exactly.
When you have your land and you can grow your own food, this was the case, of course, in the 18th and 19th centuries. When you have land today, you can secure it. You can use it as security for loans to invest, to create, to start your own business, and so the principal point here is that an economic prosperity begets independence. And the opposite is also true, that the lack of economic prosperity essentially renders citizens more and more dependent on the power of the state. And that is not, I mean, you can do that for a little while because we have had situations in the history of democracies where we have had economic collapses, like during the Depression and so forth. So we have some examples in which we have managed to circumvent those circumstances and get ahead eventually. But if this is being done by design, and it's hard not to conclude that it is, then there is something afoot about the undermining of the very foundations of the democratic arrangement that we have.
All right, so that's a flag. And I do want to shift gears a little bit here in terms of the discussion, and it goes like this. What strikes me as well about this budget is that we have, frankly, a kind of a fascinating dynamic where you have a lawful lot of money going towards government. So that means that the administrative state has more and more of the power. And I marvel at how, well, a couple observations. One is that we haven't had a budget until this last Monday for some 7.5 months. I mean, I've never seen this before. 7.5 months, we've not seen a budget. And that is a critical document, or it should be, for transparency and accountability, so people know what the heck is going on. So we didn't have that. And then meanwhile, we have this whole dynamic where, the question will be, will the administrative state be accountable to Parliament when we've got a whole history of big spending where we still don't know where the money went? I think of the so-called concerns regarding the green slush funds, where the government was prorogued. Before that, the Speaker of the House even weighed in and said that the government has to come clean with this. We've got a real accountability problem here. What does that say about the state of those basic democratic institutions, Marco?
The institution most perhaps responsible for this, people might be surprised to hear this, but it's not the government institutions. Government institutions have been known to misbehave because when no one's watching, when no one's minding the store, the clerks might be, shall we say, have the propensity to do less of their work, to be less responsible, and so forth. So what is important is that the owner of the shop makes them accountable. And the owners of this shop are us. We are the people who hold them accountable, regardless of what shenanigans they might want to be doing in the institutions or lack of accountability or what have you. Our very system rests on this idea that we, the people, the citizens, the free citizens of this country, must demand accountability from the government. So when the government decides that we're not going to have a budget, and by the way, they did this before, right? Remember that during COVID, we also didn't have budgets for quite a while. And so this is almost seems to be an attempt at normalizing this new situation in which a government doesn't have a budget. Imagine, for example, if you were in a corporation and you decided that you weren't going to present a budget to your shareholders. There'd be all kinds of hell to pay. I'm sorry to use that word, perhaps. And so this is what is happening, is that we, the citizens of this country, need to essentially get ourselves off our behinds and do our jobs. And our jobs is to keep governments accountable.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. So this is a real flag, is that we haven't had a budget for a long time. Is this budget even going to represent a serious roadmap that's going to be implemented? Or is it just, again, talk? So time will tell. We want things to move forward here. So let's talk more about solutions as we look at this budget. I mean, I think that obviously they keep, the government keeps iterating the objective that we've got to get this economy rolling. So how do we do this? I saw an interesting speech from the deputy governor of Bank of Canada. I think his name is Nicholas Vincent, who brought to attention the need to really bear down quickly on this Canada's productivity problem. It's a big challenge. And why is this relevant to Canadians? Because basically productivity is the foundation for our standard of living. And this is part of the reason why most provincial incomes on average are some 40-50% less than the poorest state of the United States, which is Mississippi. I mean, these are the facts. You can check them out. You can see them. And this shows a decline. I mean, it's kind of a divergence of two countries that's going on here. It's really, really remarkable. So how do we get things back on track as we look at taxes, red tape, getting government out of the way, and really using our ACE card, which is natural resources? I mean, what's the key to this turnaround, Marco, the solution to moving our country forward?
Like the example of the solutions for housing in Argentina, that seems to be they solve the problem to a great extent on a dime by Canadian standards. The key here is that we are the people who are going to solve our own problems. The government isn't going to solve the problems for us, and that the more the government presents itself as a solution, the more obscure and elusive the solution are. Economists, or some of my economist friends, like to say that solutions are the principal cause of problems. And this is perhaps even truer when it comes to governments. The more governments seek to have solutions, the more we have unintended consequences that get in the way. But to put it in a single sentence, we need government to get out of the way. Investors aren't going to come, people aren't going to come and try to build things if ultimately all this regulation and all these government rules put them in peril. And so we need to re-examine. We don't need a reform. We need a revolution in terms of how we run governments, how governments are accountable, and how governments must cease to intervene to the levels that they do in our economy.
I agree. So let's just talk about some of those themes, because I didn't see anywhere efforts to look at how we privatize a lot of elements of government that could easily be done by the private sector. And I want to tell you just a quick historic story that I think really tells it all as one example. And that has to do with a railway. It's called CN, Canadian National. We've all heard of it. But you remember years ago, CN was actually a government-run railway. And its productivity, its efficiency, as measured by many different measures, years ago was really at the bottom of the heap in the world. And it was privatized under, I believe it was the Chrétien government. There was a number of parties. I remember the Minister of Transportation, Doug Young, and leaders like Paul Tellier and so many others. But it's a remarkable story because CN now is at the top of the heap when it comes to efficiency. And it's a Canadian railway, just like CP is. I mean, they're really high performers. So isn't that kind of a key solution? Is let's be privatizing a lot of these crown corporations. I look at Canada Post today. I mean, we all know that we need good mail service. And it is so frustrating. I see the harm that it does to not only citizens, but small business. And I look at this and I say, surely we can do better. Surely there are solutions. Why is this not a natural for this government to sell off these enterprises, grab the money, pay down debt, and be able to improve the economy? And the bonus is that those private companies then pay taxes.
Yeah, we don't even have to grab money. Give them away.
Give them away.
Give them away. I mean,
Yeah.
who's going to want to buy Canada Post at this point?
Right.
I mean, except for the assets, really, and those are worth something. But if we keep going down the path of the total disregard for property, I wouldn't even want to get it for free, right? Because you still got to maintain and pay taxes and all that stuff. But the reality is, we're in that transition in the world from a point of view of economic terms and technologies and all this stuff. Why are we clinging to sending letters today when it's completely unnecessary given all the means of communication? So why bother? We have courier companies, we have all these things. So anyway, not to belabor the point on Canada Post, but there are always different kinds of solutions, right? And these kinds of solutions are not going to open up by government. Look, nobody likes to talk about, what's that name, Musk.
Oh yes.
The guy who, for example, revolutionized the space travel, not quite, but putting satellites in orbit. NASA couldn't do it. It cost him an arm and a leg. It became horrendous. And they had the creativity to create essentially a rocket that could go and put something up in orbit and come back, land exactly where you needed it to land, and be reusable. So that's just a silly example, perhaps, but that is the point. The point is about innovation and creativity is only going to be released when government steps aside and lets people do what they need to do.
I like that. I like the way you think, Marco, because I think what we're putting into perspective is that Canada has some big challenges, but we've also got big opportunities if we enable us to think outside the box. We need this transformational thinking that will move our country forward. And it's interesting, the comments here. There's a comment here, we should be able to build anything in this country. Exactly. How are we going to recapture that attitude, that culture, that we're a place that builds our country and we don't just simply are going to go quietly in the night and decline. So there's interesting things. Brett says Canada Post is an absolute mess. So maybe, Marco, what your solution is right. Just step away from it, and let's look at the different options. But we've really got to get. This is an out of the pool moment where we need to look at these big solutions and look at the international options as well. It's very interesting. Sheridan says, I have a tangible solution, David. The politicians pay to inflation if the debt increases their pay and decreases by the same percentage. If debt decreases, their pay increases by a tenth of what is saved. Wow. So linking performance to pay, is that a viable model for parliamentarians? Are there some good models out there?
It's tricky because then we get caught up on what performance is. I wrote an op-ed a few years back about doing it in a different way. What I would do to attract better performers to office is to say, because right now there is an incentive for people who are not very productive, not particularly ingenious, and not particularly enterprising to come and get themselves elected. And these days, you know, almost anyone can get elected. So that they come and they want to be in office, because not just the perks that they're in office, but also there is that pension thing, at the end of 2 terms. And so how do we incentivize people to come and be part of running government if that's all they're expected to hang out with, right? And so we don't need people who want to make more money. And traditionally, there's been this silly idea that if we pay politicians more money, we're going to attract better people. No, you're going to attract more money-hungry people, which is not the same thing.
Wow.
And so, in my paper, I sort of suggested that what we should do is pay politicians by the average amount of the last 5 years of their earnings.
Oh.
So if you were on unemployment insurance for the last 5 years, then you shouldn't get paid much more than that running for office if you were somebody's MP. But if you were a successful entrepreneur and you were making $1 million a year, and then we should pay you something close to what you were making. And by some calculations, on the average, things would work out. But the fact is, we would be able to attract much better qualified people to come to office than just simply pay them by performance. Because the other thing is, politicians are also blocked often in their performance by what do we call them? Bureaucrats, right? And so bureaucracies are huge blocks on the performance of government.
All right. Well, we've got a lot of issues to solve here, and that's a very interesting idea about, how do we pay our elected officials, let alone how do we ensure that we've got a great bureaucracy as well. We need good people in government. And we do know that we've got to move this country forward. So there's a lot of opportunity here for our country. And we'll see if this budget actually delivers on results. And so it behooves us as citizens to watch very carefully these issues. So as we wrap up, one of the things I did want to highlight, and I'd like to ask you, Marco, to speak to it, and I want to mention this, is there was an interesting paper that was tabled at Frontier, and it had to do with overly optimistic projections in budgets. And it's almost farcical, because there's statistical measures to look at these forecasts and say, is the government actually delivering, frankly, credible forecasts, or is it just poppycock? So what is this all about? Measuring federal budgetary balance, forecasting accuracy and bias. What is that all about, Marco?
Well, the governments make predictions years out on what their incomes are going to be and what the state of the economy is. And it's an art, not a science. The reality is it's nearly impossible sometimes to predict what the economy is going to look like 6 months from now, let alone 5 years from hence. But the reality is there is a way to do these things properly, and one builds in assumptions that are, somewhat conservative and whatnot. What the paper shows, and it's an analysis of the Trudeau budgeting years only, is that the predictions were biased in the sense that they were purposely rosy about what the future was going to look like, so that they could essentially rev up spending because they could say that they expected more revenue. And in that way, the deficits that they were predicting were in fact much larger down the line. And so it's a shell game in a way. And there are some indications, looking at this budget that we have been talking about, that follows in the same pattern of rosy predictions and rosy assumptions about what things are going to be like. I mentioned their over reliance on the idea that people are just going to rush into into the investment market and put money into it to make up the gap. And so it is called a bias, but the bias is essentially political, right?
All right.
Because they want to show that they're spending less.
So that's a very important paper. I encourage people to look at it. You can see it on our website. So in the meantime, why do budgets matter to citizens, Marco? Is there an easy answer to that?
Absolutely. We want to have an idea of what governments are doing, what they plan to do, so that we can hold them accountable. If there are no budgets, there is no accountability.
All right. Well, that brings to a close our discussion today. We've really appreciated your comments and discussions. Pardon me, I have a little bit of a frog in my throat, as they say. But I wanted to thank you, Marco, Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, and of course, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois for joining us earlier. This has been a far-reaching conversation, and we really appreciate your comments. And one of the things I wanted to highlight is some of those comments as we come to an end, one of which is pen and paper in hand, ready to learn from this channel. Thank you. That's Goosebumps 2024. And this is a comment regarding that Bruce Party episode regarding property. Great video and conversation. So far, this is one of the very few conversations about this issue that includes consideration of the market uncertainty that this ruling has created. So thank you so very much from that audience member. So in the meantime, I want to encourage all of us to continue to be involved as citizens, to be able to continue to have this discussion on the frontier. And thank you again, everyone. And this has been another great discussion. Thanks in part to all of you. So have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the same place on this Thursday on the Frontier.
Thanks very much.
Here at Frontier, we don't receive any government funding. We are nonpartisan, and we work for you. Find out more and support this important work by visiting fcpp.org today.